My name is Jared Carney, and I'm honored and excited to moderate a panel today on ESG, a road to sustainability. SparkLabs Group is a global venture capital and accelerator network. And as a venture partner of SparkLabs, we're proud to put on a series of panels that focus on a variety of subjects that are near and dear to our hearts as investors and human beings. And we can't think of one that is more important and more timely from the perspectives of global investors and global entrepreneurs and for innovation in general than ESG, environment, sustainability, and governance. So with that, I'm going to very briefly introduce our panelists, and what I would do is I would encourage all the participants and viewers of this panel to look at their biographies more in depth when you get a chance. I don't know where everybody is on your screen, so I won't refer to everybody where they are on my screen. I'll just refer to them by name. First is Bill Emick. Bill is a noted author, policymaker, investor, and a real dean in the space of impact. He's had appointed positions in city government, in New York, in federal government. He's the author of a book with Howard Buffett, which he'll tell us more about, that really is kind of a playbook to sustainability. And we're honored to have him on the panel before one of his classes at the Columbia University School of International Policy Affairs. So Bill, delighted to have you join us. Thank you. Next to him is Mark Nelson. Mark is a longtime participant in policymaking in energy, with a focus on a couple of energy mediums that he'll tell us more about, and has a very strong view on policy, and particularly the measurement that go into the understanding of how we actually define ESG. JB Tanko, if you can wave your hand, JB, please. So everybody knows who you are. JB is a long-time experienced policymaker from many different sides of the coin in ESG. Presently, he is running public affairs and government affairs for a public-private government alliance, which he'll tell us more about. Before that, he ran government affairs for Westinghouse Company. So has long experience and probably the scars to show for his time in the space. Jessica Jackley is joining us, and until very recently was the Chief Impact Officer for Aspiration. Aspiration is a very, very interesting platform, financial platform for underserved, underbanked, but also people who have more normalized access to capital, and talking about the ability to put into practice impact principles into everyday spending, everyday consumption, and everyday life. Jessica has not only done this in this position, but has done it for years previous. And rounding out the panel is my friend Frank Meehan, who's actually zooming in from Taiwan. So he gets the award on the panel for the worst time zone. Frank is co-founder and CEO of Equilibrium. Equilibrium is a startup which is doing groundbreaking work in terms of providing the tools that corporates of all sizes need to really measure their footprint, measure their impact, and going on a go-forward basis, really find ways to improve their story and most importantly, their effectiveness in the area of ESG. Just a quick word about me. In addition to the time that I spend helping SparkLabs foster and innovate new companies and invest in them, I spend most of my time as vice chairman of McKinley Capital, a $6 billion asset manager based in Anchorage, Alaska, One of the things that we do at McKinley is we invest in ESG. So we have a substantial commitment to ESG in our public and our private funds. And so this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. And as an individual investor, my family has been heavily committed to the so-called green hospitality space, having been innovators at the forefront of launching the first green hotel in California. So with that backdrop and why we're here, the one thing I will say to the audience, and you're encouraged to submit your questions for the panel throughout this, and we'll get to them in sort of different periods through the session. In preparation and talking with our panelists, what I came to realize is that this panel really has taken shape and can be best summed up as metrics, measurement, and just what is impact anyway. I think that we're still pretty early in the space, and we need to sort of understand our definitions and do our best to get on the same page, because there's still quite a bit of debate on what the driving principles, organizing principles, and goals should be for ESG, for investors into ESG, and for investors more broadly. So with that, I'm going to ask the person who's most experienced on the panel to give us his perspective on, just what is impact anyway, and work backwards from that and talk to us about the state of data and measurement in the field of ESG. And so, Bill, if you take a couple of minutes and give us your sort of overview of where you think we are, it'd be very helpful.
Well, first of all, let me express my appreciation for saying experience rather than the oldest person on the panel. So both of which happen to be true. For me, performance measurement really became mainstream with Peter Drucker in the 1950s and 60s, where he basically said, if you're not measuring, you can't manage. Question is, what do you measure? And traditionally, performance measurement has been focused primarily on economy and efficiency, ultimately leading to surplus of revenue over expenditures, profit. That's what most businesses are about. Government and social organizations tried to manage to equal, not run a deficit, balance their budget, and then do their mission. The impact investing space, to me, is broadening one's definition of how you measure success. So profit and efficiency doesn't go away. Impact investing, to me, says, but that's not enough, right? I want to invest in companies that are solid, that are well managed, that make money, but I also want them to leave the world better off. I want them to be a plus in society, not a minus. And the simple example, and it's unfair, but maybe not, ExxonMobil, right? Makes a lot of money, good profit, great company, efficient, but it externalizes a lot of its damage. The damage of, heavy duty undersea extraction is spread across all of society. If you netted that out, its bottom line wouldn't look so great, right? So I think people who are interested in impact investing are saying, I don't want that. I want it to be profitable, but I also want to see the measurement over here of how this company impacts the world. And I don't just want not negative, I want positive. So I'm an academic. That's a short answer.
Well, so the thing that I took out of that that's, I think, very important is this broader idea and definition. So what you're really saying is there's no such thing as a single bottom line. At a minimum, we really need to think about things in a double bottom line, or perhaps even more context, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, because I'm been involved with the Buffett family, you know, Warren like throws this all out the window and says, I can't manage to 2 bottom lines or 3 bottom lines. I can only manage 1 bottom line. So I do a good job on that. And then my impact is I give all my money away to Bill Gates and he makes the world a better place. I can't manage toward multiple indicators. With all due respect, and obviously he's been a lot more successful than me, from a management perspective, I think that's just not right. It's not true. No company manages to just profit, right? You have a number of different indicators. Everybody has a dashboard. So the question is, what's on your dashboard? And I think ESG is saying on my dashboard is making the world a better place, or at least minimizing harm, right? So I don't like the idea double or triple bottom line. I like performance indicators. And I'll give you just a quick example. I grew up and I've lived my life in New York City. I used to pride myself on growing up in the most dangerous city in the world, right? It was hell on wheels. And cops measured success only by how many criminals they arrested, which sounds logical, except it's sort of like fishing at a fish farm. If there's a lot of crime, it's easy to catch criminals because they're all over the place. New York City transformed itself when the police department said, wait a minute, success is measured by how much crime there is. Reducing crime is the right bottom line. My point there is you need to think about, in general, both as a manager and as an investor, what are your objectives? What are your goals? And then look at that company and say, okay, these are the things I'm concerned about. How do they do on those measures? And if they're not measuring sustainability, and that's what I'm interested in, I'm not gonna, that company is not for me.
So Bill, before I jump from you, what's sustainability? Define sustainability, please.
So to me, sustainability is minimizing waste. I mean, it goes back to Deming, you know, it's really TQM. It is the ultimate, sustainability gets a bad name because it's like tree hugging, right? I'm for sustainability. Oh, well, then you don't care about profit. You don't care about, I would say that's upside down. The true believer in sustainability says there's no waste in this company. We use everything. We have a recycling plant right on. So if we don't use it, we recycle it, we create energy. So to me, sustainability should be, every company should try to be sustainable. And I predict 15 to 20 years from now, sustainability will be right on that panel for every successful manager in every organization around the world, because it just makes sense.
So Frank Meehan, tell people just in a couple of seconds, you know, what Equilibrium does, because what you're doing is you're making the dashboard that Bill is referring to. And so, you know, tell us about what the dashboard is, how you make the dashboard, what goes into the making of the dashboard, what input clients and customers have into that. And then we're going to talk about, you know, how that's a good thing and maybe how there's some challenges to that.
Yeah, so you know, I'm here because I'm making a very large giant bet that Bill is 1000% right, and that every company is going to be sustainable, and every company, the most successful companies, will be sustainable, and that, you know, by far and large, it's very simple. Like, you know, the most competitive companies in the future will be the most competitive. And so will be the most sustainable. And so, you know, we are here to help companies be sustainable through data. So we have built and just launched this week, actually, a end-to-end sustainability management platform. And so we take all the data across a company, and that is far and beyond carbon now. That's water. Obviously, there are HR data, chemical spills, ballast, sludge, and everything that we do for the maritime industry, and everything. And because if you look at a sustainability report from someone, world leading in this area, something like IKEA, we are climate positive, water positive, forest positive. We're diverse. We have we have a diverse workforce. We have integrity across the workforce. It's just, and I think just going back to that definition of sustainability, it's just incredible how few people actually realize what that means. I mean, if you actually go and look at the UN, sustainability development goals and everything, it is huge. But I think that a lot of the companies are very, very smart about this now, all the way down the supply chain. So what we do is we help companies manage their data from a dashboard perspective. We help them improve with a smart goal setting management tool. We help them auto-create those reports, so you can create a report which is auto-populated and updated with the latest data across your platform and across your supply chain. So I'm going to be showing some of that stuff during the webinar as we go forward. But sustainability reporting, as Larry Fink from BlackRock said earlier this year, is as important as financial reporting. So it's that simple. A lot of companies get it. 96, 10 years ago, last thing I would say, 10 years ago, there was about 14% of the S&P 500 did sustainability reporting. This year, 92% of them do it. 10 years ago, about 4 companies in the global Fortune 500 had targets to become carbon neutral of some form. Today, 152 of them do. So, and it's just rapid increase. So, they all get it. And I think that it's fascinating how people don't realize that most of those companies are in the US, despite Trump. So we'll see how we go. Thanks, Frank.
So, Jessica, so far, Bill and Frank have talked about, sort of the definition and on a macro basis and reporting the importance of measurement. But we're now at a stage where many companies are actually making ESG principles, embedding, or even sustainability, the actual product, the actual service that they provide. Can you talk a little bit about what you built at Aspiration, what it is, how it's embedded in the actual business, what it does for consumers, and how that's really not reporting, how that's really something even more imminent to consumers?
Yes, and can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Just to be clear? Okay, great.
Yes.
I had a last minute issue with my laptop, so I'm on my phone and blocking calls. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I really love what's been said so far. Bill's definition, his way of thinking about it is as broadly as possible. This is kind of redefining what success is, redefining what we are acknowledging, right? As companies, what companies impact. In fact, I know gets sort of a negative reaction from a lot of people, that word, because it does connote like touchy-feely, we just want to do something because we're good people, that sort of thing, that sort of vibe. But I think just there's this myth of neutrality, right? All companies are actors and have an effect on not just their stakeholders, their shareholders, I should say, but on their workers, on their customers, on communities, and on the environment as a whole. So I think the companies that are just acknowledging that's real, that's true, so we're going to be thoughtful about the risks and opportunities with all of those layers, and we're at best going to be proactive about making sure we're having the best effects on all of those layers. I think that's just not being intellectually lazy. I think it's just being awake and aware of who you are in the world and what you're doing, big picture. Otherwise, it just feels like putting blinders on. You mentioned there's companies are thinking about this, but as we move forward, more and more, everybody is understanding this is the way things should go. I mean, there's all sorts of data out there that show consumers, right, want companies, if all else is equal, they want to work with, they want to purchase from a company that is paying attention to this stuff. At Aspiration, I just left a few weeks ago to do new things, but at Aspiration, when I was there for the last year and a half or so, one of the programs I got to manage was called AIM, Aspiration Impact Measurement. And basically, it was a way to give a steady drip of information to Aspiration's customers about their own purchasing patterns. There's a ton of information out there, right? You can find all sorts of different versions of, I guess, ways to understand the goodness of a company. How good is this company to people and to planet, et cetera, et cetera. But the data, I mean, to Frank's point, I think what he's building is fantastic. It's difficult for the average consumer to understand and utilize that information. So at Aspiration, one of the things that we had been doing was, with the swipe of your card, you get a push notification that says, great, you just spent $10 at Target. They have an AIM score, our own scoring system. They have a score of whatever, 90, 80. I don't know these by heart, but 1 out of 100. It was this kind of dumbed down, easy number for people to see, okay, if I, can't afford my electric car yet and I have to get gas on my commute home. What's the best gas station for me to stop at? The highest score, which stores, all sorts of retailers. Anywhere you would use your card, you can see what that score is. There are other plugins where we took thousands of data points, crunched it through a little algorithm with different weights and different factors, and then we're able to give people a number. I think more and more the more tools that we have to that information day to day as they're making decisions where they're going to shop. I think that's going to be huge for allowing those companies to shine and to actually and faster. I think they're going to win. Are going to win.
Right. Thank you, Jessica. So I think that it's an excellent example of taking a data-driven approach and putting it into sustainable behavior by consumers, not just measuring the impacts and effects of corporate activities and trying to control waste. To Bill's point earlier. So Mark Nelson, why don't you tell people, just to give people a quick moment about how you spend your time and some of the efforts that you've been involved with recently. And then what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to comment on the whole idea that the field is obviously being driven in large part by metrics, and what you think of how those metrics are formulated to date in the ESG field.
Sure. All right, I'll do that. And just to give my quick answer on what sustainability is, I'm obsessed with old things. One of my favorite Wikipedia lists is the list of the world's oldest companies, which until probably the last week will be dominated by Japanese hotels founded before the year 1000. Maybe tenuous on the record keeping, but one of the things that catches my eye is about half of the oldest companies in the world are Japanese, and many of the world's oldest companies are like sake and beer breweries, with most of those beer breweries on the oldest companies list being German. So that's sort of my perspective. And then I've chosen as my background today a photo I took outside of the house of Henry Darcy, one of my very favorite innovators. He was the one who really made pressurized water and sewage systems for cities work. To give my idea of what I think of innovation, I think that getting water and sewage systems in cities was a great innovation. So what I spend my time doing, I have been in California for a number of years working as an environmental activist in Berkeley. I've split off my own group now to work a lot closer with the industry that I'm trying to steer the most, which is the nuclear industry. And I spend my time yelling at people on Zoom calls, trying to get action on the biggest energy questions of our time. I want to talk a little bit about data. Frank, you're in Taiwan. Not to put you on the spot, but do you know when Taiwan's electricity was cleanest?
Was cleanest?
Yeah, like
Wow,
zero carbon
I mean,
percentage.
I'd say like, I don't know, 1950?
No,
no idea.
it was real dirty then. I mean, I guess depending on how you count the hydro. All right, that goes way back. So that's good. That's a sustainable answer. I'll say in terms of recent years, the best year was 1985 with about 62% zero carbon. As of 2017, that had fallen to the mid-teens percentage-wise, and it's gonna kind of bobble around the under 20% probably from here on out. So when we're talking about like data, I think that knowing that just in general, you know, the basic inputs, how clean are they? When were they cleanest and how did they get there? Boy, that's a real obsession with me. And it's something I hope we revisit in the conversation, but I'll just stop there for now, I think, so we can get another round of.
When was California's cleanest?
Yeah.
By the way.
So there's another interesting story. California, in many ways, pioneered electricity, the thing, along with a few other systems. For example, the Niagara Falls system up in New York, and then there was some early work in France. But in terms of like actually having what we would call a grid, as in not just the start of electricity that, of course, was in Manhattan with the Edison Electric Company. So California's electricity was cleanest when it was only dams. If you're talking in modern times, the removal of coal in recent years has done by far the most to lower emissions, but it's been almost directly counteracted by the closure of nuclear plants, the political closure of nuclear plants. So yeah, it's within the last couple of years.
But you're giving me a great segue to JB to round out the introductions and introductory thinking, because there's no establishment of grid. There's no establishment of California having almost or as close to an energy policy as any one state in the United States has, without government policy and government being a strong actor in the field of ESG, right? So JB, you've been at the game of government policy innovation and trying to sort of speak to how government and environmental organizations and energy producers and energy and power companies and even organizations that represent consumers for a very long time. Can you give people just a little bit of your background and then talk about where you think today, at least in the United States, the state of play is with government and its thinking at all levels, in all areas around ESG, please?
Sure. So thanks for the introduction. And in fact, Professor Emick may not remember this because I'm probably one of many students.
I do remember. I do. Yes, I do. You're unforgettable, please.
Well,
of course I remember.
Look at that. So I work for a group called the Blue-Green Alliance, and we represent labor and environmental organizations to address climate issues in a way that creates good jobs. We represent about 15 million members and also a series of corporations that serve on as advisory committee and as well as on our various boards. And so a lot of our work is really at this intersection of trying to think through how do we address climate in a way that builds toward the new clean economy. I would say that right now there is, so the answer to California, I think the goal is in 2045, California will be 100% clean. So in theory, the cleanest will be then, but we're inching toward every year with higher and higher standards around renewable energy to hit our renewable energy portfolio standard. But I think what you'd see around the country is this growing understanding by states and cities around how to incentivize and or mandate a new, cleaner reality. And most of that is really starting to focus in some key areas: energy generation, as we already discussed, renewable energy of all sorts, solar, wind, hydro, cleaner buildings. So how do buildings get cleaner all around, from how they're built to how they're retrofitted, and massive investments also in electrifying our transportation all around, everywhere from light duty cars to heavy duty cars to buses. 2 years ago, as an example, California passed a policy that will transition all of our buses to electric by 2040 with a steady scale, a rising steady scale every year of hitting new targets. 2 weeks ago, California passed another policy wherein manufacturers who sell into California now need to start to produce electric trucks, medium duty, heavy duty trucks, is some of the largest polluting trucks, largest emitters of pollution around the world. Mary Nichols, who runs this group in A or B, called it the first in the world. So California often likes to talk about being first in the nation. In that instance, it was first in the world. And so what we see at states around the country, as well as cities, both domestically and internationally, are coalescing of these sort of critical similar policies to get to a cleaner environment, which in and of itself also creates a series of new opportunities to create and maintain good jobs. And so that's a lot of where we are today, where we see, and that's in and of itself also at a state and city level. Again, I think someone had talked about the elections, and depending on where it goes in November, one of the candidates there just came out with a platform 2 weeks ago on another bold investment plan around clean economy. So what we really are seeing is I think, while I've been in it for a long time, it feels like, you're still at the early stage of really developing a new economy that is really based on sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. So the new economy based on sustainability, when you sort of cross-reference that against the political reality, and in the United States, that means, as you well pointed out, JB, local, state, as well as federal. I mean, that creates a real kind of, that creates a lot of variability and a lot of risk from investors and from entrepreneurs' perspectives. How do you see that policy environment enabling innovation? I mean, don't you think that could actually be an impediment to the kinds of innovations that we'd see in ESG that would, as you say, create a cleaner future?
I'm probably not as well versed in answering it from a corporate perspective as some of the other folks in the panel, but I'd see, because of the sort of coalescing of these concepts, that in many ways, while there is risk, you're also starting to see a lot of similarities. So just last year, as an example, so I run our Western states for the Blue Green Alliance. Washington State, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado had all passed some elements of 100% clean energy policy. So all the states have now outlined policies for their states that will get to a cleaner grid, on top of what California has just done. As we look into what Oregon is going to do next year, we start to see the same. So I think, again, I can't speak from it from a business perspective, but what we do see are a number of states, again, sort of coalescing on these critical policies. So if you're looking at it from a clean energy space or a cleaner building space, the policies that are being put forward are fairly similar across those states, and across, as well as the cities. So my sense is that in and of itself creates a large opportunity for corporations or investors who would like to get into this space. But again, I think some of the other panelists might have a better sense of that.
Bill, do you have a perspective on an answer to that question? Because not only from your perch as an academic, but also please tell the group about your activities as an investor in the impact space, where you've you've been doing quite a bit. So I think it'd be helpful to people to understand that too.
So this is, this is such a broad discussion. I mean, and it should be, but we're talking about almost everything, right? Food, for me, it's food, it's energy, it's healthcare, it's education, it's housing, it's work-life balance, and they all connect. I just wrote an article that was published on Monday about how we should use this experience in COVID to rethink work. That we should, we've been on a 5-day work week since Henry Ford. We should go to a 4-day work week. And one of those days should be remote if you can, right? I was fire commissioner at fire department. We're open 365 days. But for people who can, for work who can, you should have 3 days. People should work in the office 3 days. Think of what that would do for the environment. So there are big opportunities if we think big. Second thing I would say, which is important to me, is you can't know about everything, whether you're an investor or a government official or just a citizen. So I know housing, I know the built environment. So a lot of my focus is on that because I think it's an important area. Affordable housing for all should be a global quest, and it has a lot of impact on the environment. So as I look at investments, one of my biggest investment in recent years is in a small company called IX Investments, which is trying to be, I'll get in trouble for this too, Berkshire Hathaway with a heart, a Berkshire Hathaway model, but having all these ESG models built into it. And our most successful investment so far has been in a company called Multigreen, which builds affordable rental housing, which looks at, where you put the housing, where the jobs are, where's daycare, who takes a holistic view of, how the housing is made, all those things. So for me, if you want to do this, you got to start with, I can't know everything. So whether you're an investor or an actor. Then I think the second step is, what do I know something about, and let's build on it. And I guess for me, the third is having a passion about it, right? So for me, housing has been my life since the 1970s. So yes, I've gone other places and done other things, but when I come back, and if we were starting a business and we said, so Bill, where do you want to focus? I'd say housing. And I think each one of us probably has one of those things. So it's combining knowledge, business acumen, and passion. And that's going to take us a long way.
But what about the risk? What about the risk factor that we were talking about before, specifically with government, right? Because you're a professor at the SIPA School at Columbia University.
So quickly, I would say, Jared, that government more than likely can get in the way. If it's a really good, sustainable investment, it's going to be really hard for government to screw it up. Hopefully, this election will make at least the federal government more of a positive actor rather than a drag. But I don't think government's the driver, right? I think government can be either, they can accelerate good things like tax credits for electric cars, or they can decelerate it by passing regulations that make it easier for coal. But they don't drive it. If Tesla is a good company and it makes sense and it's also good for the environment, they will succeed no matter what government does, in my view.
Jessica, I mean, Aspiration, when you were at Aspiration, consumer finance, heavily regulated industry, not only on a federal level with the CPFB, but also with, state by state. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you if you build it and you get it right, it's going to happen?
I mean, I think so. If we step back, I think what customers want will end up eventually, sometimes it takes a good long time, being reflected in policy. So I do think changing the hearts and minds of the everyday consumer, the everyday customer, is a really important piece of this. It's not just nothing's going to really happen. I think businesses doing what done, but tweak. I think there's so much to be said, to be very touchy-feely here, but this will be my addition to the panel here. I really think what's most important is intention, right? So what is your main goal? What is your priority? Are you seeking to solve, global goal number 4, quality education, for example? Is that your goal? You want to go do that? Let's figure out the best way to do that. Or do you want to go make shoes, but do it in a really nice way? Like, do it the best that you can. Both are fine. I'm agnostic about, look, you can have a perfectly respectable, ethical, wonderful business goal. But if we think about like what you want to do as an entity, as an organization, I think prioritization of a lot of really well-intentioned goals is incredibly important, and we don't talk about that enough. I teach a course at USC called Entrepreneurial Solutions to the Global Goals, and it's interesting, to Bill's point, rarely do we look at, week to week, we'll look at a different goal and we'll say who's doing what to solve for quality education, to solve for clean water, for good health and well-being, whatever it is. We'll say, or here's a bunch of nonprofits doing great stuff, many of them very entrepreneurial. Here's some for-profits, here's some high government policy work. It's not often the case that we come away from those discussions, my students and myself, saying, gosh, if only policy X, everything would solve itself. I think determined people, determined companies, determined organizations get the thing done because of and with the help of or despite government, oftentimes, to be honest with you. They'll solve for it anyway.
So Mark, we've gotten into the conversation about goals, and obviously, there's pretty close to unanimity amongst the other panelists that there's goals, and someone even mentioned the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I guess what I'd like to ask you is your perspective on whose goals, and and how do we figure out those goals?
So I spend a lot of time on the phone now with folks in Africa. And I got to tell you, the shit I hear from them about their dealing with the German trade representatives, it is extremely dire. So I think that you've done a very good thing here by asking whose goals. And I think, unfortunately, Jessica, I got to disagree with you. Perhaps probably the single least important thing I've seen in my dealings all around the world is intention. I know that's not quite what you meant. You meant, well, on what you focus on, and then you've got to check goals and outcomes. But boy, there may be nothing less important than intention. Let me come back to Africa in a moment. We've got a number of people here with ties to New York City. New York is running dirtier today than it was about 2 months ago. Why? Because you lost one of the 2 units in Indian Point. And it means Ravenswood Generating Station, which will kill people with its pollution. Like, there's no, people aren't debating was Raven was clean or not. No. It's dirty. But that thing is firing up because you've got to power New York City. It's not really an option. And because Indian Point was carrying much of the load and Indian Point's being shut down, I guess it's about to be dirty. Was that the intention? Doesn't really matter. River keepers, a bunch of rich white people, they don't even live in New York City, probably most of them. So it doesn't really matter that their intention was to keep the fish eggs cooler or whatever. They shut down Indian Point. That was their goal. They're moving on to other projects like anti-vax and stuff. In the case of Robert F. Kennedy, it doesn't really matter what the goal was. The outcome is gonna be really bad. And the New York thing is interesting because, especially on intentions, the Clean Power Plan under Obama was specifically gamed by the leading liberal states to eliminate the most profitable nuclear plants because it wasn't sure that the market itself would eliminate them. So in California and New York and Connecticut and other states where grid constraints and a lack of building new power plants led to some of the few profitable nuclear plants in the United States. They were all profitable then, but the most profitable were the ones in incumbent coastal grids, right? So there was a little fix added. I don't know who, I don't know on whose behest, I don't know whose congressional staffer put it in. There was a little fix in Obama's Clean Power Plan that gave states like New York credit for getting cleaner if you replace a plant like Indian Point with a state-of-the-art combined cycle natural gas plant, which of course is what has just occurred upriver from New York City with Indian Point. So we can say intention, impact, it's about getting people on board, it's about smiling or whatever. But in the end, CO2 grams per kilowatt hour, that's going to be what does the sustainability or not. I mean, sorry, this isn't quite what you asked, but when we're talking about size and impact, Facebook globally used 5 terawatt hours of electricity last year. Now, just like all the other companies that claim to do it off of pure wind and solar, they lied. Facebook lied, Amazon lied, Google lied. Their lawyers told them, no, you can lie about this. No one's going to call you out on it. And the regulators are in on the scam. So you do what you want, right? But anyway, Facebook's in California. We're about to lose if we can't save it. And I'm going to work my damnedest to make sure we can save it. If we lose in the next 4 years, the 18 terawatt hours of 24/7, round the clock, all day, every day, all year for the next 60 years, if we lose that power from Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, what the hell does it mean that Facebook's like, oh, we have some renewables around the world that go up and down, even though our data load is like this. 5 terawatt hours globally versus 18 in their home state that they have not lifted a finger to fix. So sorry, a little bit of anger there.
No,
we can come back to Africa later. I've taken my time.
I mean, we want the diversity of opinion. Before I get to some questions from the audience participants, Frank, I mean, Mark just brought up a really important core point when you map that to the conversation about goals, which is, how do you deal with verification, right? How do you deal with authenticating what companies are saying they're doing with? I mean, are you simply a portal, or are you the good housekeeping stamp of approval? I mean, if you're going to become a standard, what does it take to become a standard?
Well, for one, I mean, there's more than enough standards and frameworks in the sustainability industry. There's like there's too many. So I certainly, we have no intention of getting involved in that either. I mean, there's everything out there. I mean, one of the things I like very much is in recent times is science-based targets, which is a new one, which means that a company signs up to its emissions being in line with the 1.5% warming goal, and can't use offsets to get there, which I like a lot. So, and in terms of verification on that, it is a very interesting thing, but a lot of these bodies out there do have verification things to do, but we look at it from a data perspective. So there's a big company that kind of dominates this space, and which uses it's a lot of this stuff, and there's a company called EcoVadis, and it's all about like that. It's like, okay, you load up, you put in a survey as a supplier, and you upload loads of documents, and then you've got to cross-check those documents with the survey answers to see if they're correct. And it's like, it's really old school, and okay. And that kind of verification needs to go away. But that is how most verification is done these days. I believe that, and what we are doing is through data science. So, all the way down the chain, if a lot of suppliers are putting their data into Equilibrium's platform, the main companies, for instance, like IKEA or something, we can detect if there's anomalies in the data. So we can see if there's trucks or fleets that should be performing similarly to other trucks or ships, but aren't. And that's either that the data has been underreported or not, right? And so, data and data science pretty much can take care of a ton of verification now. You can pick and see what's right and what's wrong pretty quickly without having to go through that old school cross-checking method.
So we have a specific question from the audience for you, Frank. Does the tool measure performance of the company's suppliers and customers, given the extent of environmental and social impact in the supply chain?
Yes, it does. So, and it does. So it does what's called scope 1, 2, and 3, which is full. Where scope 3 is by far. So taking that to one step, I think what a lot of people, it's incredible how many people just how complex it is and how unclear it is to everybody. But just taking a step back, for a big company like an IKEA or a Microsoft or anything, when they say they want to be carbon neutral, like I would say probably about 85% of that target is going to have to come from their supply chain, what they call scope 3 emissions, which is all their indirect, so leased assets, what happens to a product, their franchises, their investments, everything. And so companies are, and this is the really interesting thing about these targets, is that these targets have now made sustainability a core thing in their procurement process. So for Microsoft, sustainability is everything in procurement. So now that means that it flows all the way down the supply chain, which means companies that never even thought about having to report beforehand and put their data out there are being asked by IKEA, by Amazon, by Microsoft, by ABB, or whatever it is, to get data. And they're really surprised by that. And so what we do is help that process. So each one of the suppliers can put their data in and put their assets in, and then grant permissions up to a customer to see the overall data without having to share the underlying assets underneath it, just the calculated rates around it. But it gives the ability to have a look at data up and down the chain.
So JB, Frank's bringing up this kind of the large companies participating in driving supply chain behavior. When you represent the workforces of those companies, right? I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is incorporating the treatment of those workforces and their priorities into definitions underneath the ESG umbrella. Do you find that that's happening, or is that a fight? Is this is this the new labor movement of the 21st century, or is it easier than that?
I think generally we've seen support from workforces around clearly cleaning up the companies all around. For workforces, particularly say in the manufacturing spaces or what have you, their workers are sort of the front lines of what's dirty, what's not, and so clearly they have a vested interest in it. I think also as we start to see broader investments again, say just talking electric vehicles, the workforce there fully understands this shift as to we are moving to cleaner vehicles, and so how do we become at the forefront of bringing back electric vehicles or maintaining electric vehicle manufacturing and assembly in the U.S. And so from that perspective, I'd say that a lot of the workforce in and of itself both values and often advocates for broader, cleaner sustainability in the companies that they work for. And for a lot of reasons that, at the Blue-Green Alliance, we see that workers are often leading some of those same conversations along with environmental groups as to how do we make these changes.
Is it a collaborative effort, or does it get contentious at any time with management?
Yeah. In general, it's it's always a hard question to say what part. So in general, I think issues around sustainability can be collaborative. I mean, there are other areas where there's other issues, but not as often there.
Okay, thank you. Zale Tabakman asked the question, where do you find ESG investors? He's setting up a sustainable food hub in North Philadelphia that grows vegetables under LED lights. Bill, you want to give your perspective on the best place to find people who are investing in ESG or impact?
Well, it'll be the most general answer in the world, but I think it's true. In the course of our research to do social value investing over a 10-year period, it was clear to us that the prime investor for these kinds of activities are millennials. That's what they say, and that's what they do. So it's a new generation. They're not necessarily all the big money people yet, but they're gonna be, because a lot of people like me are gonna die. And my daughter's going to become relatively wealthy, relatively quick. And I think I brought her up well, so she's not going to spend it. She's going to invest it. Hopefully she'll look at most of the things I've invested in and said, yeah, he was okay. He walked the talk. But those are the people, I think. That's where you start. And increasingly, day by day, year by year, millennials are dominating. They're the largest in terms of people now, and pretty soon they're going to be the largest in terms of money. So that makes me very hopeful.
Do you think that individual investors, millennials, have the right financial vehicles in which to put their money so they can be invested in the kinds of companies that the person is talking about, or that Jessica perhaps is going to go out and start next?
No, and I think I don't think they do, and I think you knew what you were asking. That's a great question. So there are companies like IX, like the one that are beginning to try to provide that option, right? To say, this is all we do, so if you invest in us, but it's small. The Blackstones and the BlackRocks, the big players, the ones who really change the world, are talking about this. They're committing it to it. But again, to get myself in trouble, I guess that's why it's a good thing of tenure is a good thing. So far, I think it's just talk. I mean, yes, they're setting up funds, they're allocating more of their staff, but are they actually finding investments and putting together packages so someone like my daughter, who inherits $5 or $6 or $7 million, could say, I can't think this all through. I know, and I read all these great reviews about Blackstone's impact investing fund, I'm going to go there. It's sorely needed. A lot of talk, but right now I don't think it's there. It's accessible, and to go to Frank, verifiable. That right. It's not just a name. It's really there, and they can show you the dashboard, and you can see.
So, a lot of people talk about, and this actually comes from a question from the floor, the idea of investing in climate change versus the large institutions that perhaps perpetuate it. You used the example of Exxon at the outset, Bill. I think what people really mean is investing against climate change. But I guess the question I have, and Mark, if you want to take it briefly, because we're actually, we're going to start winding down soon. Is it possible to invest against climate change at this time?
Well, I'll answer something really quickly, and I wanted to say to Zale, assuming that your business economics work out just about like every single industrial enterprise in every single sector since the advent of the second industrial revolution in the 1870s. In other words, you're going to spend a lot on lights, and then you're going to run them 24 hours a day all year. This is just a shot in the dark, but there's only one private equity owned nuclear plant in the whole world, and it's just a few hours drive from Philadelphia. It's Susquehanna, owned by Talon Energy. I have no clue if they'll be this aggressive, but at least in other countries, like in Czechia, in the Czech Republic, the local nuclear utility is so proud it sells nuclear honey from its plants. I think that what you should do, they've got one of the cheapest power production prices of any plant in the world. It's quite extraordinary. Not that you're going to get wholesale, but you should get a hold of them. You will immediately zero out your carbon, not in the bullshit, we can lie to the public and they don't care way that Google and Facebook do. Not like that, but like authentically around the clock. So take a look at them and see if they'll connect you with somebody who'd get you set up with that if you're using nuclear electricity. In terms of betting against climate change, I answered a question in our question and answer just a moment ago. At least in nuclear, until recently, whenever people were asking me, hey, what can we do to invest in nuclear? I'd be like, Toshiba just sold their most profitable business division to pay off bankruptcy bills from attempting to invest in nuclear. I have a different answer now. Because there's rumors that some of the biggest international pots of capital are reconsidering nuclear. Part of this is the age thing. Old people don't like nuclear, young people do. That's because old people cowered under their desks in nuclear bomb drills when they were young and they're scared, and then young people are scared of climate change. So it's kind of reversed. As young people get into positions of influence, they'll be like, why were we blocking nuclear? And then the old people, they won't answer because they'll be dead or gone. So if you're wanting to get prepared for what's coming next against the big financial institutions before they get there, look for series build nuclear projects. It's hard to be investing in these things. They're 10 to 20 to $30 billion projects when they get going. There aren't many in the West, unfortunately. Build is dominated by state-owned companies in Russia and China. But as the new nuclear build projects get started, you should pay very close attention. I know at least in Silicon Valley, the advanced reactor space is like a big popping thing that's all frothy. My advice there is to be very, very cautious. Most of the sales pitches for advanced reactors use the word innovation a lot, but are like either going back to old ideas, or their sales pitch is that they solve problems that don't exist. So be careful there. I will say, if you find in nuclear, again, this is before the big players get there, if you find nuclear plays where the advanced technology doesn't require a reactor redesign, take a very serious look, because it's reactor redesign that murders. And then I think that's good. That's enough for now.
So Frank and Jessica, we just got a question for both of you. Jessica, maybe you can take it first. If we're going to a data-driven environment, what's the next priority for accountability in a world where everyone is going to have to report and account to consumers? So how do we prioritize our accountability to consumers, Jessica? And do you believe that consumption is activism?
I do. So I think before I go there, to just clarify what I was saying, Mark, love your thoughts. I don't think we actually disagree. I think what I was trying to say is, of course, Facebook should make better choices. Policy to help that along would be fantastic. Wouldn't it be great if people didn't really care about being on Facebook so much? That would be a way to go too. That's intention. That's desire. Like your basic, what do you actually want? I would love, it was weird. It's been weird in my history to work at, for example, banks, where I wish people would just spend less. Like I don't want to see all the metrics sometimes are off, right? I think it'd be better when people went to buy a new thing, even though that might end up giving some revenue to the bank. I think, wouldn't it be great actually if they just didn't need that next new thing? I look forward to seeing more tools that are customizable, that can be tailored. I think, we're all learning, we're all changing, we're all having those desires hopefully shift. And so let's see what people ask for, right? What's tricky is some of the things that are easy to, for the everyday consumer to understand. How much does this company pollute? Or do they pay a fair wage? Whatever. So, some of the things that are easy to understand can actually not make that much of a difference in terms of how good that company is, how sustainable. So there's a translation to be done. There's translation that needs to happen and education that needs to happen. So I think it's going to be a mix of both what actually matters the most and that depends company to company. But I mean, I think Mark has a lot to say on this, and I think it's great. I think it's going to be a combination of what matters most to each company, depending on what they do, how they go about their business, et cetera, and what people are asking for. And there'll be things that are really important because the optics are easier. The message is more simple and straightforward to get across. And there'll be things that matter, even though they're not sexy and they're not maybe that interesting to a lot of people, but actually make a material difference in carbon emissions, for example.
Okay. Now, Frank, what's your response to that question?
So I think consumers are extremely aware of it now, and are driving a lot of that. I mean, look, you come back to, you know, the biggest players on the planet are getting extremely aware of it, and I think it comes back to, as we have seen in the last 12 to 18 months, an activist group can very quickly, you know, get to the heart of something rotten in a corporate extremely quickly these days. And that corporate, if it isn't prepared and have an understanding of its supply chain and its data and where it might have you know, weaknesses, is going to be in a lot of trouble, right? So, you know, obviously the fashion industry, you know, gets into trouble, you know, in a lot of cases. You know, we've seen you know, the Boohoo you know, case of you know, exploited workers happening to be in Manchester, of all places, right? So, and it's just what, again, I think people, you know, it is just so extensive in terms of what is coming to me as a product. But, you know, look at IKEA, you know, it's extremely clear about what it's trying to do. Amazon's packages, which have obviously, you know, rocketed in terms of usage now in the last few months, come with a whole slate of stuff over the packaging now about where it is and what's it doing and where it's from. You know, they're under tremendous pressure to improve things. So, you know, younger generation really gets it, starting, you know, puts a tremendous amount of pressure on companies to perform. And as I said at the very start of this, I mean, 100% believe the most competitive companies will be the most sustainable. And this is a total shift. Larry Fink was absolutely right in BlackRock. You know, finance is going through a fundamental shift, and those companies which don't get this shift are gone. You know, they're just not going to be around, because if they don't get it and don't, you know, they will be torn apart.
So I'm going to do something a little unfair to you panelists. We really don't have any time left, but given that we're in a brave new world, and I'm assuming that you left a little time at the end of this panel to go a little bit longer, I'm going to do a lightning round on you, because we'd be remiss in any conversation that's global, such as ours, even with the topic of ESG, not to try to understand the intersectionality with the global pandemic that we're in and COVID-19. And so I'd just like to very quickly, really like to end with your thoughts about the relationship, if you see one or if you don't, between ESG principles and the pandemic that we're in. I'm not asking you to say if the pandemic could have been prevented with a greater commitment to ESG, but I'm just wondering how it's making you think and how it's affecting your planning going forward when you think about ESG. JB, I'll lead with you, please. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd say that a lot of, well, climate policy, again, talking about from the policy space, has always talked about this intersection of creating good jobs, particularly as states tend to, I think Professor Emick could raise, sort of incentivize and or develop these sets of policies to accelerate growth into these sectors, are really looking to see how do you do so what is the proof that these are actually creating good jobs? So I think we've talked about jobs in and off of this panel related to sustainability. So if you're looking at renewable energy projects, what are the actual wages? What's the healthcare associated to the workers that are on that job? So at a time previous to, say, the pandemic, it might have been sort of bubbling around in the sense of we should ensure that this new economy creates good jobs. I think what you're starting to see are states who are incentivizing, as I said, renewable energy, electric vehicle adoption, EV infrastructure, and ensuring or mandating or incentivizing that the companies that are in those spaces are paying good wages in healthcare, and a lot of it driven by both the change, I think, of the millennials, who are very aware of the disproportionate impacts between folks between wages in the companies, as well as what George Floyd and some of those issues had come out. And in some ways, this whole concept of COVID, George Floyd, have all sort of risen to this moment of really ensuring that what we do next addresses that our new economies really do create good jobs.
Thank you. Mark, your thoughts around pandemic and ESG?
Yeah, so in terms of economy, I gotta say, Jessica, I was on the phone this morning with folks from the Congo, Kenya, and South Africa separately, and it never once crossed my mind to tell them to use a little less. I think they have the opposite problem we do, that they use a little too little. But in terms of pandemic preparedness, I'm delighted to see, after some nervous months and the Northern Hemisphere had its spring refueling outages, that fortunately, nuclear plants appear to be sort of focal points of good hygiene practices radiating out in both communities and states, partly due to the existing concerns about radioactive particles during servicing and stuff. So they've responded really well to pandemics. That was good to see, because until it happens, I know they have plans for it. Until it happens, you don't know for sure. On the subject of jobs, of course, one of the things about these nuclear plants is you look across America, unions have been decimated, but wherever you find nuclear plants, it's like the 50s all over again, because these are ultra stable jobs where communication and cooperation between every level of management and labor is just vital. And so you have these little blue union spots in these wide expanses of red states that are otherwise covered with wind turbines, right? So when we think about jobs, it's important to think of the jobs not like a one-time blast, like from a candy bar or just eating out of a bag of sugar, which is unfortunately the way we often talk about, say, Green New Deal jobs. It's like spoon some sugar without benefits or unions straight into their mouth. And then once the wind turbines are built, you keep on 2 or 3 dudes in trucks to go around and service. That's not any good, guys. That won't do it. So you got to think in really long-term total job years, the education level required for the different jobs, which can be everywhere from high school on up for nuclear. And I guess that answers how I think about sustainability in a time of COVID.
Jessica?
Hey. Mark, we'll go offline. Be good to keep talking. I feel like we have a lot more to say, which will be good. You know, these times I feel like for many of us that are so privileged, maybe listeners today, certainly all of us sitting on this panel that have time to carve out and talk about these things, these have been very difficult times, but they've been so much more difficult for so many other people. So quite frankly, in terms of my actual, like my day-to-day, my life, you know, the last few months have been slower, smaller, smaller circles, smaller loops, closer to home. I just had my 4th baby. We have a lot of little people running around, and thank you. I'm very tired. But you see that my husband came in with a 2nd cup of coffee. Anyway, it's a time, I think, at very best, for people to rethink priorities, to think, what is the thing I'm doing with my waking hours at the end of the day, when I don't have the external you know, attention or praise or incentives or the things that I'm used to being surrounded by. What am I doing when I'm awake? Kind of awake. When I'm awake during the day, what am I working on? What am I building? What is it all for, right? Those questions. I think we're in touch with a lot of suffering right now, because the prominence of Black Lives Matters, the prominence of just feeling connected to people who are suffering with the actual disease. I feel like it can be maybe a time for a reset in a really great way. Again, I'll throw that out there, and you all can talk more about nuclear energy and the broader economy. But that's been my experience. It's been hard to parse from the last few months, that sort of sense that it's a hard reset.
Frank, where do you see the pandemic and COVID-19, particularly given that you've started your company in Asia?
So look, I think it's making a tremendous impact on companies in a number of ways. So I mean, clearly, obviously, companies are extremely aware from supply chain perspective that being sustainable in the supply chain is more crucial than ever beforehand, and having alternatives and looking at that from a different perspective is extremely important. It's you know, look, during the last few months, things have actually accelerated. I mean, you have you know, I'm just going to take a quick case. So Apple recently went carbon neutral, and I was just on the phone yesterday with a great guy from SASB, which is one of the big sort of sustainability standards, and he was saying that he has just got a number of inquiries from Taiwan for the first time, like a lot of them in the last few months, asking about SASB and how they do sustainability reporting. And you know, it's not hard to connect those two dots in terms of Apple deciding to be carbon neutral and suddenly putting enormous amount of pressure on the suppliers to start giving them data. And I can see Mark shaking his head here, but for me, I think this is a good thing. I think this is a great thing. I mean, look, it has to all go in the right direction. Can't go backwards. So, and you know, companies being more transparent with their data and suddenly figuring out what they've got to do and is important. And supply chain in the pandemic has been the utter focus for many companies, and it seems to be accelerating.
Thank you.
Bill? And sorry, can I just say, Frank, I got folks at Thai Power. Let's get something together. There's a way to get carbon neutrality for your Taiwan suppliers immediately, but we got to work. Thanks.
We will get you guys. We will get you guys connected. Bill, first word, last word. Obviously, there's you know, complexity of policy and political considerations here with pandemic response. But from your perspective as a policy innovator and investor, you know, where do you think we are with COVID-19 and pandemic, and you know, how has it informed your activities and your thoughts?
I can't help but be struck by what the world was like when I was young, with the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement and all the violence in the streets and all the chaos and tumult. And then I would argue major reforms happened and things got better. A lot of things got better. And I think that's what's going to happen now. I think there's a deepening reality in everyone, whether they're conscious about it or coming to conscious. We live in one world. There's no way back. We're not going to become independent countries again. You know, it's one world. And what happens in China affects New York, and what happens in Europe affects South America. And it's a good thing, because we do live on one planet. And I think in the end, our values are being tested. I think people are starting to say, you know, in the end, education for all, healthcare for all, decent housing for all, decent jobs with a living wage for all. I think these are things that are not, I know it sounds political, but it's not political. It's not political. It's what should be. It's what has to be if the world is to become sustainable. And I think more and more people are coming to that recognition. And again, just like sustainability for business, these big objectives are good for business. It's good for the world. It's good for everybody. It's in my interest to have every child have a good education. It's in my interest to everybody, if they're sick, to go to the doctor, because if they don't, it could kill me. You know, these are fundamental things. And I think we are seeing these fundamental things. And I'm optimistic. I think we're on the verge of a kind of renaissance period over the next 10 to 15 years.
That is very exciting, and I can't think of a better note to end on. And so just to wrap things up, I mean, really what these 5 very thoughtful panelists have given us in this conversation is not only a deeper look into the various ways they think about and act in the field of ESG and sustainability writ large, but also how they put it into their own business and social and policy-oriented activities. And in terms of the global pandemic, we can see how that equals a focus on good jobs really being good lives, how those lives are powered, how we actually authentically try to take clean power from the world in order to power those lives. It gives us the space to rethink our priorities and put sustainability higher on that list, and leaving maybe smaller lives, smaller loops together, but understanding at the same time that actually there's an acceleration in supply chain reform going on around the world. And, you know, that's something that corporations are participating in aggressively. But, you know, the lesson, the great lesson with the most perspective for us to remember is that from great tumult really comes improvement, better. Because of the interconnectedness that we all share, it's a good thing to understand that those jobs equal addressing climate change, that better power equals you know, a better and a healthier lifestyle, and potentially the capacity to resist disease when it knocks on our doors. And so with that note, I want to leave everybody in the audience with an optimistic outlook. You know how to contact us at SparkLabs via our website, via our social media. You've got the ability via the Zoom call to communicate with the panelists. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us through any of those methods. And I want to thank you all again, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and from what I hope will be the beginning of a large number of conversations between you all. So thank you all, and stay safe.